Second reading this morning comes from the book of James, chapter 1, verses 1 through 18, and that can be found on page 228 of the Bible or 277 of the large print Bible if you'd like to follow along with me. Again, I invite you to listen to the word of the Lord as it may speak to us at this time and in this place. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in dispersion. Greetings. My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you is lacking in wisdom, ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given you. But ask in faith, never doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Let the believer who is lowly boast in being raised up, and the rich in being brought low, because the rich will disappear like a flower in the field. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the field. Its flower falls, and its beauty perishes. It is the same way with the rich. In the midst of a busy life, they will wither away. Blessed is anyone who endures temptation. Such a one has stood the test and will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. No one, when tempted, should say, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. But one is tempted by one's own desires, being lured and enticed by it. Then, when that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And that sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. Do not be deceived, my beloved. Every generous act of giving, with every perfect gift, is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. In fulfillment of his own purpose, he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. My favorite theologian of all time is a man by the name of Paul Tillich, although Karl Barth recently has been quickly catching up to Tillich, but that's neither here nor there. But Tillich is absolutely brilliant. A mentor of mine made me read him when I was 19 or 20, and I was really struggling with life and with my faith and probably with just God in general. And in his book, Dynamics of Faith, Tillich says that faith is ultimately a question. And the question is, who or what is God? And then how then do we better relate to this God? Some people say that faith, or rather how we as Christians understand our faith, is ultimately what separates us to other faiths in the Abrahamic tradition. The Abrahamic tradition is Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And what differs us from Jews and Muslims, besides kind of the obvious things, is that you can't be a cultural Christian, really. It isn't something you just are. Sometimes we treat it like that's what it is, but at the heart of it, what makes a Christian is faith. Namely, faith in Jesus Christ. But that we aren't necessarily defined by a culture. We're defined by our understanding of faith. You can be a cultural Jew, but there really is no way just to be a cultural Christian. Tillich says that faith is a question. Ultimately, the question points us to God. For Christians, it points us to God through Jesus Christ. But I think what's really amazing about what Tillich says about faith is he says that every question implies doubt. It implies a not knowing. A question implies a certain amount of skepticism. There's uncertainty in questions. And Tillich says that the same is true of faith. Faith for Tillich includes doubt in the ability to have faith, not just in spite of that doubt, but sometimes we come to faith because of that doubt. Now, the problem is when that doubt then becomes overriding. Sometimes we get this overwhelming feeling of, what if this is all wrong? What if there is no God? What if this Jesus thing is all just some scam? I mean, I know people who claim to be atheists who seem to be just fine, and they don't stay up at night worrying about a lot of the same things that I do. And most of them, to be honest with you, don't seem like unethical or bad people. I mean, some of them are obnoxious about their atheism, but I know Christians who are obnoxious about what they believe too, so that's not exactly an excluding factor. So we can look at that, and we can begin to wonder then if we even need God. So sometimes doubt can be the destroyer of faith, even though I think that a moderate dose of doubt can actually be healthy for faith. You know, what's interesting is that in the Reformed theology, there's no room actually for atheism. For us, we actually don't believe that atheism exists. Rather, what we believe in is an idolatry. You see, as members of the Reformed tradition, what we believe is that God is in everyone's heart, that God is present in everyone's life. It's just that sometimes we place our faith in creation or created things rather than in the Creator. What I found in my life is that even the atheists I know have faith in something. It's just not God. And in our tradition, then, we call that idolatry. When you make something other than God with a capital G, you're God with a lowercase g. That's what we call idolatry. And I'll tell you, sometimes when doubt creeps in and becomes overwhelming, it's hard for me not to slip into idolatry. It's a hard temptation. Because sometimes it's easier to think that something can fix me or that I need to be fixed than it is to rely on God when things get rough or when we go through trials or when we begin to have doubts about who or what God is. James, throughout his book, is going to push us to look at a life of discipleship, a life that depends on God, and then that dependence then leads us to serve others. And that's totally counter to a lot of the messages that we receive today about life. We're told a lot of times that what matters is our own happiness and our own fulfillment. And that's what's most important. And we're told things like that God wants us to have our best life now, and that we're supposed to be rich and successful and happy. And that then is the measure of faith. If we have real faith, then we'll have real, tangible, real happiness and self-actualization in our life. And sometimes we're told that if we just look within ourselves then, sometimes the answer lies inside of ourselves. And what happens then is James in this book is going to challenge all of that. In fact, James actually starts off this book by stating that practical discipleship is about the trials and struggles and not looking inside of ourselves for answers. But that what we need to be doing then is that we need to be looking for God. For James, for his understanding of faith and what discipleship is, the answers don't come from looking within ourselves or from living some sort of miracle life. But they come from developing a relationship with God through those struggles, through the trials and temptations that we all face in our life. For James, faith isn't something that's measured by how happy you are or how fulfilled you feel in this world or how successful you might be at any career. But for James, faith is measured precisely how you deal and endure through the struggles and hardships and trials and temptations that we're all forced to face in this life. It's about how you push through your doubts. It's funny, the biggest challenges I think that I've ever faced in my life have all been things that have come from within inside of myself. Which is hard when we hear the spiritual stuff of today where they say that all the answers are within yourself. If I'm honest with myself and I really look at it, I've never found any answers by looking within myself. what I found there are doubts and struggles and temptations and idols that I've built. The hardest trials that I've faced in my life haven't been anything that have happened around me, but they always have it's been what they've caused to happen inside of me. When things around me cause stuff like self-doubt, which can be so crippling, or feelings of not belonging or feeling left out, which can be so alienating. And the worst sometimes is the feeling of getting everything that I ever thought I wanted and still feeling completely empty inside. These are the things I find when I look inside of myself and rely solely on that sometimes. And when I was younger and I felt that way, I turned to really unhealthy alternatives to make me feel differently, to make me feel like I did fit and did belong, or to make me feel like I didn't care if I belonged or not. Or I'd turn to things that would even just for a moment make me not feel empty inside. And what would happen is they would work temporarily. And I would put then all my faith in that. They would become my idols. There's so many things in today's world that fight to give us answers and feelings the easy way. When really what James says to us, and what James says gives us the answers to what we're looking for. James says it's a single-minded pursuit of God through discipleship in and through Jesus Christ. I had to learn the hard way that the effects of drugs and alcohol wear off, and they oftentimes, if not always, leave you in a worse situation than when you started. But a lot of us have things that we turn to instead of God when it comes to our struggles to live meaningful lives. Food does it to people. There's a euphoria that's accompanied by eating too much. Your body actually dumps happy chemicals on your brain when you overeat. And of course, for it lasts a few minutes where you feel fantastic, but then when that wears off, if you're like me, you feel like garbage half of the time afterwards. For some of us, it's shopping, buying things, makes us feel better for the moment. Or going really fast in cars, or shopping for really fast cars. Some people even do it with exercising and cleaning. And trust me, I wish I was one of those people some days. And the truth is that none of these things are bad in of themselves. None of them by themselves are evil or idols on their own, but when they're utilized then in attempts to make ourselves feel better or to overcome feelings of struggles or inadequacy or expect them to alleviate our pain or to see us through some trial, that's when they turned bad. When we put our faith in them, that's when we get in trouble. Because the solutions that these things offer us, they aren't real. They're temporary at best. Tillich defines faith as ultimate concern. It's what we're ultimately concerned with. And he says in kind of confusing language that if what we put our faith in, if what we're ultimately concerned with isn't actually something ultimate, that it's an idolatrous faith. Because only God is ultimate. So it's like this. If it seems like making money is what I'm most concerned with, and I put most of my time into making that money, then money has become my God. And because money isn't what's actually ultimate, then essentially I've built it into a false God. I've made money into an idol for me. And that's what James is getting at here when he talks about rich people. When we look at what he's saying about them, he really isn't talking about people of faith in God who happen to be rich, but he's talking about people who emphasize being rich, who put their faith in their wealth. James is saying that those who are too busy getting rich to realize anything else will perish because money doesn't last. So it really isn't that money is terrible or that having money is bad. It's when that becomes your ultimate pursuit or ultimate goal in life. And Tillich says that if money is your ultimate concern, that you're committing idolatry. So what James is going to try and do throughout this book is to push us into looking at our lives and seeing then how that fits into a life of discipleship and what exactly a life of discipleship looks like. He's going to show us what a life of discipleship in Jesus Christ looks like and what it does. And he's going to try and give us practical or real advice on what faith is and how we live into that faith. And one of the fascinating things about this is right off the bat, James says that faith will be tested, even for the strongest believers. That faith will be tested. And it won't be tested just once. But for that those who are walking in discipleship with Jesus, faith is tested constantly. It's tested by ideas that something other than God can give us the answers that we're seeking. It's tested by nagging suspicions. It's tested sometimes by horrible loss and tragedy. It's tested by addiction and by false gods and by all kinds of temptations, including money. And the goal then of discipleship is to produce the kind of endurance that James talks about right at the beginning here. This kind of endurance that looks solely to God, even in our hardest struggles, rather than houses of straw that come in bright labels and fancy packaging. And so when we struggle with our doubts, James is going to push us to have faith because of our doubts. And when we struggle with temptations or trials or hardships or our own character flaws or by hypocrisy, James is going to tell us the one thing we never doubt is that somehow God is still going through it with us. That God is with us in our struggles and our trials and our temptations and our hardships. And somehow then, when we make it to the other side of those, which we will, that we come through them feeling even closer to God and even more rooted in our faith somehow. And so what discipleship is, what the goal of discipleship is to keep us rooted and keep our minds on that which is ultimate. And when we falter in that, discipleship is there to remind us that the trials and tests and the struggles that we are going through are producing a certain kind of endurance. And that endurance, that ability to make it through these struggles and these trials and these temptations that we face, give us these wonderful gifts of maturity and completeness and wisdom and total faith in God that James lays out for us at the beginning of this book. I don't think James expects us not to have doubts. But James doesn't want us to let those doubts overwhelm our faith or push us to have faith in things that are other than God. James tells us to endure them and to push through them. And for James, these trials that we face in life are where we start to become disciples. And Tillich agrees with that. Tillich says that because faith is a question, because it has this element of doubt in it, that it's that doubt that keeps us pushing and seeking and looking and finding ways to better understand and better connect to God. Essentially, the question of faith, the thing that makes us distinctly Christian, is the beginning of discipleship for us. It's okay, I believe in God. Now, who or what exactly is God, and how do I better connect to that God? And that's where the journey of discipleship begins. Discipleship doesn't begin in a bed of roses, but it begins in our struggles, in our doubts, and in our hardships. So as we begin then to work through James's outline of discipleship these next few weeks, may you go with endurance, knowing that struggles aren't because you're lacking faith, but that struggles can make your faith stronger. May you go taking whatever faith you have and placing it solely in God. And may you go realizing that which you seek comes through discipleship in and through Jesus Christ, who leads us to that which is ultimate, to that which does last forever, and for that which does make you complete. May you go knowing that the answers are found in and through God's love. Amen.